All right, so to kind of recap what we did last Friday from section 7.4, we were told in our theorem that if we have an altitude drawn to the hypotenuse, just like that diagram shows, we have a right triangle, we have an altitude drawn from the right angle to the hypotenuse, that is going to divide the triangle into two smaller right triangles in such a way that all three triangles are similar. So knowing that, they want us to fill in these four proportions. The easiest way to do this is to take your three triangles and break them apart into separate pictures. Okay, so we already have the big triangle drawn. I'm going to have a medium-sized triangle, and then I'm going to have the small triangle. And I'm drawing them so that they're all turned the same way. All right, that way there's no confusion as far as what corresponds to what. They're all going to be facing or turned the exact same way. And so I've got to make sure that I mark them properly as far as putting the correct sides together. So to do that, let's take a look at the top triangle first. Let's just kind of focus on just that triangle for a second. Looking at that triangle, what you're going to want to do on every one of these problems, especially from this assignment, is you want to pick one of the acute angles in the large right triangle. Okay, it doesn't matter which one, you have two of them obviously, one on the bottom left and one on the bottom right, because your right angle is the one on top. Pick one of those, call that your first angle, let's say this one, for example. There's my first angle, mark it with one mark. Then look at the other acute angle, again, in the big triangle, and mark it with 2. I don't know what those angles actually measure, but I know that they're different from each other, right? I'm just marking one with 1, one with 2. Now, since the smaller triangles are going to be similar to that, all the corresponding angles have to be congruent. So now, I want to look at the medium-sized triangle, which is the one over here on the right. And looking at that triangle, I see, okay, right there's my right angle. There's my single marked angle. So I need to have a double marked angle in here. So that must be this one. Then I look at the small triangle. In the small triangle, I see that I only have the double marked angle marked, but I know this has to be a right angle because it's a linear pair with a right angle. So this is a right angle, making the one up top here must be the single marked angle. Again, I'm able to do that because I know that the three angles of a triangle have to be congruent to the three angles of any triangle that is similar to it. That's part of being similar, is that you have congruent angles, right? So, questions on how I marked that, or why I marked it the way I did. Okay, and one thing I see now that I'm looking at this closer, I forgot to mark this length here. That's E from our homework. All right, so what I want to do now is take my angles that I have, my three triangles, and I want to mark the two smaller triangles that I have drawn here. So the middle triangle is the middle-sized one, which is the triangle on the right. So looking at this one, I want them all to be marked the same as the big triangle. So this has to be the double marked angle, this has to be the single marked angle. Looking at the small triangle, I want this to be the double marked angle, I want this to be the single marked angle. I want them all to be facing the same way. So, looking at the big triangle, I see that the hypotenuse, which is this side, the hypotenuse there has to correspond to this hypotenuse here. So looking at our triangle on the right, where's the hypotenuse? F. So F goes there. Again, looking at the triangle on the right, between the double marked angle and the right angle, that's E. So double marked angle and the right angle is E. Then between the single marked angle and the right angle, that's H. So this is H. We do the same thing for the small triangle. The hypotenuse of the small triangle, there's the right angle, so this is the hypotenuse. That's D. Between the right angle and the double marked angle, that's G. Between the single marked angle and the right angle, that's E. Again, questions on how I was able to redraw those and find out what corresponds where. Now that I have my three triangles drawn, again, the top triangle, I only want to pay attention to the big triangle now up there because I already have the small triangles redrawn. Okay, so I'm only looking at the large triangle in my original diagram. And in our first proportion, the way we've been setting up proportions is that the numbers on top have to come from the same triangle, right? So therefore, looking at our three triangles, which triangle has both G and E in it? The small one has both G and E in it. So then we say, all right, well, G, which is this side, corresponds to E, they tell me, which is this side on the middle triangle. So G and E correspond. Therefore, E in the small triangle must correspond to H in that middle triangle. Questions on how I found that? You have to isolate which two triangles are they even talking about, and then you're matching up the sides. Okay, so like in number 4, J and D are coming from the same triangle. Which triangle has both sides J and D in it? The big one has J and D in it. And so then J corresponds to D. J is the hypotenuse of the big one. Well, which triangle has a hypotenuse of D? The small one has a hypotenuse of D. Therefore, D from the big triangle must correspond to G in the small triangle. Catching what we're doing? Okay, take a look at number 5. Number 5, we're not given the same sides. Okay, both sides of one triangle. We're only given that both triangles, again, I know it's both triangles because I have one triangle on top, one triangle on the bottom. I know that both triangles have the length of F involved. Which two triangles have the length of F involved? The big one and the middle one. So if we say the big one's on top and the middle one's on the bottom, then that means F from the big one has to correspond to which side in the middle one? H. Okay, and then looking at, again, now we're looking at the middle one on the bottom. F on the middle one on the bottom corresponds to which side on the big one on top? J. We're doing that same process one more time. This time our two triangles involve J from one triangle and G from a different triangle. So which triangles deal with J and G? The big one and the small one. Those are the only two triangles that deal with J and G. So J from the big triangle corresponds to which side on the small triangle? D. And now the G is coming from the small triangle. It's the one we have on the bottom. So G is right here. That corresponds to which side on the big triangle? D. Again, that is why I drew these, so that it was easy to see which parts are corresponding. Okay, so this is number 9. And for number 9, again, we have that altitude drawn from the right angle to the hypotenuse, so that divides it into 3 congruent triangles. And what you want to do, and the way I always do it, and it doesn't have to be done this way, obviously, but I always like to go from biggest to smallest, okay? And it doesn't have to be done that way, but before I start naming anything, I actually need to mark my diagram. I need to mark the angles. And just like we did before, we just pick an angle to be our first angle. So, J, first angle. Now I look at the other acute angle in the big triangle, L. There's my second angle. So I got a single mark and a double mark. Now I need to go to the next triangle, which I believe the one on the bottom is bigger than the one on the top, right? So looking at the one on the bottom, I already have the 90-degree angle. There's my single marked angle, so this guy must be the double marked. And now I look at the small triangle on the top. This is my right angle. There's a double marked angle, so this guy must be my single marked angle. Again, are there any questions on how I do that? Because that part is very important here. Okay, so next, how did you name your first triangle, Noah?
I did JKN.
JKN. Okay, so you started with one of the smaller triangles. That's fine. You don't have to start with the big one. So JKN. All right. Well, triangle JKN, if you look at how you named that, you said single marked angle, double marked angle to the right angle. So single, double, right is how you named that, okay? So now let's look at the smallest triangle there. And we need to mark that one single, double, right. So it must be KLN. See what I'm saying? Okay, and now the one we haven't done yet is the big triangle. And again, we have to name it properly, and it has to be single, double, right. So single, double, right gives us JLK. As soon as you name that first triangle, regardless where you start, if you start with the middle one, if you start with the small one, I like to start with the big one first, okay? But regardless which one you start with, as soon as you name that first triangle, that then dictates how you have to name the other ones. Okay, because they all have to be named properly so that if you look here, J in the middle triangle is the single marked angle. K in the small triangle is the single marked angle. And then J in the big triangle is the single marked angle. They all have to be the proper angles. Okay?